Good morning, wanderers. In today's video I'm going back to school and I'm walking up to Stowmarket Middle School to meet Steve Williams, a local historian who grew up here. I'm going to retrace the steps of his cross-country run that he used to do when he was at school back in the day. He's also going to give me some of the history of the area on that route. By the way, me and Steve are not going to run this. I don't think there's any chance of that for either of us. So do join us on this trip down memory lane.
Come along, yeah, you know you can. Walking on, he's the walking man.
So in today's video I'm here with the wonderful Steve Williams, and I think we're going to attempt your old cross-country run.
That is correct.
So,
from the modern, when this was the modern school.
Oh right, which was a high school, was it?
Well, that became the middle school after
Right.
after that went comprehensive. Sorry.
Right, okay.
But when I was a young boy, from 11 till 16, that was the modern school,
Right, okay.
and they were the main gates.
Right.
And once a week we used to have sort of like games session. And sort of like the summer times, they used to sort of set us up to do a cross-country run from the main gates across the wreck to the Fimber Road corner junction there.
Right.
And then we're going to try and sort of recreate some of that and pick out some historical bits of interest on the way, hopefully.
Sounds good to me. Right, I'm in your hands, Steve.
Right, for a start off, like this, before it became King's Meadow, before it became the recreation ground, that was King's Meadow. Before that, on the tithe map, that is listed, this bit is listed as Long Meadow, where the fair normally sets up.
Right, okay.
The other bit towards Fimber Road corner was Plantain Meadow.
Alright.
The bit the school was built on was Upper Meadow, and the bit where the playground and that bits are is the Lower Meadow.
So this would all be farmland going back.
This
forward.
was all part of, and that was owned by Biles and Co. That was the setup. Obviously Biles Walk was named after him.
Yeah, right.
And that was, like you say, all pretty much farmland and meadowland for pastures and things.
Oh right, for cattle and sheep.
Well, I don't know exactly what was laid there, but that was mainly sort of meadows,
Yeah,
which
so-
suggests pasture land
pasture.
and that sort of thing.
Mm.
But that was all open countryside.
Going back to, what would that be, 1700s?
The tithe maps, and these were all laid out in 1839.
1839, so early 18.
Point of interest, in the 1930s, after this had been given to the town as a recreation area after the First World War, there were plans to turn this top section into a bowling green and tennis courts.
Right.
And this is a copy of a map held by Stowe Town Council that we had access to, which is a little bit interesting. So that could have been a putting green, like tennis courts, bowling green, and a few little changing rooms and facilities,
Yeah,
all in this little court section
yeah.
here.
They developed, you've got the Rookery Bowling Club, haven't you? And
Yeah,
tennis courts in the old brick fields, I guess it is.
that's right. After the First World War, when this was given over as a recreation ground for the general population of the town, somewhere just about here there stood a big old First World War cannon.
Oh right.
And that, if you sort of line it up, that's somewhere near the end of the school buildings,
Right.
roughly about here,
Right.
with people standing around it. And that used to be a little, I mean, that's health and safety don't come into it, they just used to climb over it.
Right.
But apparently that went the way of a lot of metallic things at the start of the Second World War. They collected it all up to make.
And was it there just
webs.
for like a monument or something, or
Well,
was it actually used?
that was kids used to climb over it.
Oh,
I remember my dad saying that he used to climb over it. That just stood there.
Right.
That's like a cheap climbing frame. That just sort of left over from the First World War, and that's just a bit of a.
Wow.
But the surprising things is that the railings round the parish church got taken for the war effort.
Right.
These ones survived.
Oh.
The school, well, they wanted to keep the school kids in.
Right.
They knew that nobody would be escaping from the churchyard, but they definitely wanted the school kids to stay in. But no, I thought that was interesting. That
Yeah.
These old metal railings survived, whereas a lot of other railings, like private and like say around the parish church and everything, got taken. Well, we're not going to concentrate on it today, but of course that's 100 years since the memorial gates were erected.
Right.
So there's going to be a feature made of that. The British Legion are going to do something about that as well, because that's got 1920 on the gates themselves, if you remember.
Yep.
So that's now come up to the centenary since they were made.
Yep.
Although they weren't dedicated and officially unveiled until February next year, so they're going to have a big do for the February next year.
Right.
In the February 1921, when they had all the dignitaries and top brass from the military and all the survivors of the First World War and the relatives of those who were fallen and named on the gates, all processed from the parish church. They had a big service at the church, and then the clergy and military and all the parishioners and people involved all processed from the church down Fimbry Road and all up here. And that was one of the first movie films that was shown at the Gaumont News, the Pathé News type of thing, in the cinemas, and that was 1921, so it's a very early one. And that was the Stowmarket Procession. Just after the First World War, the pupils at the schools in the town, when they were dedicating the gates, the pupils at the school in the town raised some money to provide a memorial fountain, drinking fountain, and that's the one that currently stands down there with a little laurel hedge round it. And that stood roughly where it is now until 1961. When the Queen came to visit the town in 1961 and set off the big carnivals that followed on for every year, there was a big trade tent here, sort of like up this corner and down towards the
she drove in through the gates.
They were huge, so they had to move the fountain to get her car and her little cavalcade through the gates. So they moved it up to this corner here.
So when was it moved back down to where it is?
Well, I'm going to come to that.
Oh, you're going to come to that. Okay, sorry.
No. That didn't stand exactly where it is now. That was slightly off centre, and you can just see that just slightly off centre to the main gates. Now more in the centre. But that was dedicated by presented to the town of Stowmarket by the children of the adjacent senior council school in memory of those old scholars who made the supreme sacrifice in the Great War of 1418. And that was where it stood in this corner. You can see the rough, and that sort of painted white at the time. And that stood there from 1961 until 2007.
I thought I'd seen it down here, only once you said it was here at one time.
That stood sort of roughly on this corner here. And they decided to move it back. I mean, that hadn't been actually a fountain for it, that had been disconnected from the water supply, but that used to be out, push a button and a little bit of water come out, and there used to be little tankards hanging from the chains on that top piece, so little bronze tankards, little sort of like ladle shaped things that you could scoop the water on it, have a little sip. But that had long been declared sort of unfit for human consumption. And the interesting thing is that was when I was I forget the maker of it now, but I found the makers of it, and there's an identical one in Lytham St Anne's.
Oh, that's
and
a long way away.
There's a similar one, but with a big fancy canopy over it. But there's an identical one to that in Lytham St Anne's. Well, before that was the basket factory. That was a maltings.
Right, so I thought the building, well, I don't know if that's
Yeah, well, that's
Just styled on the.
well, they've kept the original layout, even after that was made into sort of accommodation. And but my niece sort of did a bit of research for a school project or something about the old Moultons in the town, and that had been made into a Moultons, and that was quite an unusual floor layout apparently, even when that's a Moultons. But prior to that, there was a huge windmill stood on the end.
Right, there's a windmill there.
There was a huge windmill stood there, and that was sort of like Foyce's mill. And I've got a little newspaper article about that. In 1884, a destructive fire Tuesday evening, Mrs. Foyce's flour mill was totally destroyed by fire. The mill contained 4 pairs of stone and was situated a short distance from the town on the Fimber Road. In 1826, during a memorable storm, the top was blown off and afterwards repaired. And that goes on quite a lot, sort of, about people repairing it, and then they got it up and running again, and that was steam powered, and then they also had the mill wheels and everything else. So that's got quite an interesting history. And in the Hollingsworth book, the view in one of Hollingsworth's pictures, that's Foyce's Mill, which has got a very prominent position. If you look at the parish church in the general direction, so the tower's in the west, and this is all looking westwards obviously, so that's up here.
That's the mill, oh right, wow. Little glimpses, so even though there's no photos of that time, we've got that sort of drawing on it.
Yeah, well, see, that's probably a little bit of artistic license. I think they've sort of shortened it a bit, but that was obviously a prominent mill. I think that's a little bit bigger to, not quite the right scale, but that gives you what it's meant to be and where it was. That was a lane right the way down from the top. That was the Danecroft, Danecroft Garden Centre there.
Yeah, oh right, okay.
And this was just an ordinary little lane, similar to what you get down there. And then you should come down the lane and then turn for a right angle. And
right, so it wasn't tarmac like this?
No.
Oh, right.
This didn't come in until the 1980s.
Oh right.
Up until the 1980s, this was just a little footpath right from the Fimber Road. I noticed you've on previous videos when you've come through here, you've mentioned this being Giles Lane.
Yes. Judith sort of relayed your bit of information about that.
Well, that all came about, and we don't know if that was Giles or Gillies or
right, the pronunciation.
Because in the document I referred to get that information from was from 1623. And there was no standardised spelling at that time, and the scribes used to show off by spelling the same word as many different ways as they could phonetically.
Right.
So if there was a phonetic variation but still maintained the same pronunciation, they'd go for it.
It's not helpful hundreds of years later.
Well, not really, but that's to show how clever they were, because they knew several spellings for the same words, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And that still say the same word. And so when we first come across it, that was GYLLYS Lane. No, all one word. That was GYLLSLANE.
Oh, right.
All one word. Gillies Lane, Gills Lane, and then they broke it up a bit. So that is sort of look more like GYLLS Lane. So I counted it as being Giles Lane. I
Yeah.
knew the name of Giles was quite well known in the 15 and 1600s.
Right, okay.
I found that on old burial records the name was sort of common as a first name.
Right, okay.
So
That was a first name, right.
Giles, yeah. I mean that became a surname as well, I think.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there's a lot of names did. But
with no...
But
yeah.
you see, I've been a Giles the cartoonist fan for
Oh,
many
yes, of
years.
course, yeah.
And although he never really had anything to do with Stowmarket, he was up at Ipswich, and there's never been any thing to note that any of his cartoons featured any part of Stowmarket, although there were several sort of local areas that he did use in his cartoons.
Right, okay.
But after the poor old boy died, and I'd collected all his albums,
Okay.
all his annuals, and after he died, I went to Campsie Ash auction rooms when they had his auction of a lot of his household effects,
Right.
and this old walking stick
Oh, wow.
was given to Carl and Joan Giles by Elsie and Harold. So I bought Giles's walking stick to Giles Lane,
Wow.
and I thought I deliberately did, and there were several other bits and pieces.
Wow.
And one nice little story, because I was hoping to get something. I mean, a lot of the stuff there was just junk that could come out of anybody's house,
Sure. Yeah.
to be honest. And I was very nervous at an auction. I just didn't, just in case I twitched an eyebrow wrong or thing. But you obviously have to sort of sign in and get a number and everything else. And I logged in and I had a look around the rooms to see what was about. And there's sort of like an old Alibaba linen basket type of thing, with a few canes in it in, which is what this was one of them.
Right.
And there was a sort of like box of what they call ephemera, which to you and me is sort of like the dregs out the bottom of the drawers, or and there was 2 or 3 boxes, and I bid for some of these. There was also some of his old wartime cartoon comics that he featured in alongside other comics, cartoonists, and I got some of them. I spent just over £100 with these bits and pieces, and got them home. There's 2 boxes of these ephemera bits, and at the bottom of one of these boxes was a fairly new looking bright red little cash box with a little dial front on it. Looked like sort of like a combination lock, but that was only a very simple thing, and that was like that rattled, but I couldn't get it open immediately, and I took it around my father's when we first got it, and he fiddled around with it. All of a sudden that sort of pinged open.
Right.
There's £45 in rolled up £5 notes in there, so I got nearly half my money back. And I thought, and I've been telling lots of people, I was left a small sum of money by the Giles, the famous cartoonist.
Absolutely. Well.
And of course, going back to this Giles Lane and everything else, that features, that mentions several other things, like, because that's disputed land, because Margaret Gould owned Chiltern Hall.
Right.
And you've done a little bit about the Chiltern Hall and all that back in the town. She owned pretty much all of the area of the hamlet of Chiltern,
Right.
which goes from the river near the football meadows, behind the football meadows, all the way through to the river here.
Right.
All this end of the western end of
So
town was
long.
Chiltern Hamlet, and she owned pretty much all of it. And then when she died in 1523, bearing in mind she was High Catholic, and that was their duty, anybody of note, to pay for the priest to say mass once a week for their souls to get through purgatory and all this business, and also for 99 years, and then they had to sort of switch it over for the upkeep of the highway between Stowmarket and Ipswich, which was obviously in a poor state, and she used to get fretful about that. Some of this land had to be, so it was obviously a tenant farmers looking after it for her on her behalf at different parts, and when she died they left it, the different areas run by these other people to maintain the land, but still put money in
Right.
for the church and for the priests and the highways and all the rest of it. But along came Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries, and all Catholic
Yes, of course.
was counted as sort of popish nonsense.
Yeah.
So that all went out the windows, and the Crown kept all these charity funds that had been set up for these sort of, you know, bequests for the Catholic Church, as it was then. And they kept a hold of it until 1623. Now I can't imagine today's government giving anything back, but they actually gave it back. They reinstated all these little charities, so long as they weren't used for popish practices.
Oh, which is the one condition.
Yeah, well, they said that could be used for the benefit of the town, the weald of the town. They labelled it as and for the benefit of the poor and the needy, and the benefit of the town in general. But the guy who owned these bits down here, the Foxhall Down Fields, which is where parts of the museum and everything, and the Danes Court and everything else, he was in dispute, and that went to the Chancery Court in London. That was a big thing, and it involved a notification from the monarch at the time to resolve this problem. There was a sort of a little bit of a compromise given, but that's when all these areas were listed and named, and that's where we got the name Giles Lane from 1623. Cross-country run days, this little section through here was always boggy. That was always spongy underfoot, and I sort of dried out a bit now, but that was even under drought conditions. This was always boggy here, and I think that's still. I don't think that's.
Yeah, it's
there's always a little bit sort of never really dried out.
because I think the water table's quite high here, isn't it? So.
And that was fit, and. But the other thing of interest on that old document of 1623 was that said that this land was the Saffron Pans.
Saffron?
It's called Saffron Pans.
Okay.
Which suggests that saffron was grown here in the end of the 15th century, 16th century.
Wow.
And we've also found that other side of the Stow railway station there was Saffron Fen.
Oh right.
So we could have been Saffron Walden.
Yeah.
Or with saffron we could have, but why that? But when I've looked saffron up, that likes dry soil, not boggy soil.
Oh right. So that's strange.
But so that just doesn't seem to fit the normal. But that looks like that was tried, and saffron was a very expensive commodity.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that must have been sort of a feature for a little while for the name to have been used for the whole area. Sort of.
Yeah.
Now this little bridge, I know it's not a little rickety bridge, but when my parents used to bring me down here, I was brought up in Cherry Tree Road, and my dad's parents lived up at Poplar Hill.
Okay.
And we used to walk. That was before my dad got a car. When I was only about 5 or 6, we used to come down here, walk all the way from Cherry Tree Road through the Poplar Hill, up the lane there. And that's when Uncle Mac was on the radio with the Billy Goat's Gruff. And this used to be the Billy Goat's Gruff Bridge. You know the...
I know the story of the Billy Goat's Gruff. Yeah.
And the Troll Boldy Wold. And this used to be, I mean, that's not a rickety-rackety bridge at all, but I mean, it's a nice little bridge. But this was always where the story panned out.
That's right, yeah, you're expecting the troll underneath.
down, so I'm going to do like I used to do with me
Oh right.
country running me pencils. We used to go through the water.
Oh right. Well, I'll.
You can do it from the top if you
Yeah,
want.
I might avoid that.
That's not very deep, and I'm keeping the shallow bit, but for old time's sake.
Absolutely.
For old time's sake. Hey. I mean, sometimes that is a bit too deep to do.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the time. But you'd always have your plimsolls and socks dried out by the time you got home. So anyway, so I wouldn't attempt to run through it. I'd end up flat on my face.
Yeah, that's right. Same here. I mentioned Buxall before. There's a little wooden shack hidden behind the trees, but if you come down from the Buxall Crown to turn right towards Kevin Mayhew,
Yeah, I know where you are. That used to be a little shop owned by the Southgate family.
All right, you haven't got a photo.
No, not when it was.
When it was in action.
Brian Southgate used to live next door to me in St Peter's Road,
Right.
and that was his parents' little shop.
Grocer's shop,
Sort of thing, general stores.
General
Yeah.
stores.
I think. A little way away down that way, there's an old milestone.
Oh yes, yeah.
And that's listed in the archaeological thing as being sort of post-medieval, but that's still pretty old.
Yeah.
And my father always reckoned that when the tramps and itinerants used to head up to the Stow Lodge there,
The workhouse, yeah.
the workhouse, if they got any pennies or any little bits of value, they used to leave them within a little area around that, because otherwise they'd have their pockets emptied, and if they got even a halfpenny, they'd have to go into the fund.
Right.
So they'd always, and so they'd probably have short little stays up there, and then they'd come down and find anything that they'd left down by the.
Interesting. So I wonder if there's any left.
Well, I don't know, and if they'd got any sense, that wouldn't be immediately round, but
No.
they'd be sort of like 3 paces to the. Or something like that. But that's always intrigued me. Back in sort of like prehistory, when that was a definite need, Stowmarket, or the original site of Stowmarket, was a very defensible position. Because that got the 2 rivers either side, it formed a V.
Yeah.
And on the other side we got this huge Northfield wood.
Yeah.
And the only access to it was very limited in the form of like fords. You got Burford Bridge here. I mean, there's a bridge now, but the name Burford.
Yeah, means it was like.
And Coombs Ford.
Yeah.
And then the Wash was a ford.
Yeah.
And then Station Road was a ford down near the Pickerel.
Right.
That was a ford. So that's the only approach into the town, was through these river crossings, and all around it. And like I said, down near the Giles Lane there, that was always boggy. Right. And Stowmarket was all around was bog. Both valleys were boggy, very boggy.
Right.
And that was a useful sort of defensive feature. Because the original name for Stowmarket was Thorny. And that was thought that might have been after the Danish god Thor, but that turned not to be the case, because there was another Thorny where the Palace of Westminster is. And that was a crossing point in a boggy area onto a sort of a dry area, which was covered in thorns. The nay bit is the isle,
Right.
which in river, when you get a river island, it's called an eyot.
Right.
Or an 8. And so this was the Isle of Thorns.
Right.
And that was all part of it. And Burford I've always been fascinated by Burford. Why did that get its name of Burford Bridge just round the corner there? So that was the clues that was a ford. Area just behind here,
Yeah.
where it shows as a mound, which is the old name for a burr, which is like where any burrs are built with a castle or something like that. Sort of a fortified or made up feature.
Right.
And that would be the ford for the burr.
Yeah.
And that's here.
So there's probably
And
something.
I reckon this corner, which Jude explained, is going to be built on shortly.
Yeah.
And that's also on the Google Earth maps, shows a ring ditch in this corner as well.
Right. So
There's something here.
there.
It's built up land,
Yeah.
thus a very ancient trackway through here. And that's fascinated me for years and years. But that's the key, and that swings round here. And I found a big feature there
Yeah.
that fits.
Yeah. This way.
The worst bit of the cross-country run, that's all uphill, and you get the junction up here, and that's uphill again to the
Oh yeah.
Stow Lodge, and it was sort of like halfway round, and that was the sort of then began to get out of puff, and of course there was a lot of kids in the class that never bothered to try and run it. They just sort of just used to walk it, and sort of there's always someone that
Yeah.
got in a class 2 or 3 of them that we just go to wander about and dilly-dally around.
Did any take shortcuts up there?
Well, some would sort of try and take a shortcut or do something silly, or just go into the town for half an hour and then turn up sort of puffing and patting. Everybody knew they hadn't done it, but I wouldn't say I was a very keen runner, but I tried my best to sort of stride it out. I was never a sprinter, but sort of like the cross-country runs, I could sort of pace myself reasonably well and get round fairly comfortably. And the fastest I think I can remember doing it was just over 19 minutes, about 19 minutes 50 seconds or something like that. Sort of like just short of it, that 10-minute mile or just over.
Yeah.
When the 4-minute mile was being
That's
broke.
right.
But I thought, well, that's not too bad.
It's not bad.
But I'd been about 16 at the time. I've never been able to find out why this was. I know that's named after Starhouse, but why did Starhouse get its name? And I haven't never found that out.
Right.
There have been 2 or 3 places locally that have been had sort of keen amateur astronomers.
Oh, okay.
And there's one up at Star Ridge at Batsford. One of the apprentices found a new planet or a new star or something.
Okay.
And that was acknowledged by the Astronomical Society. And yeah, so this field would be interesting to know what's down that bottom right hand corner. And that's barely visible to the naked eye, but there is a definite and that's obviously been ploughed out over the years when I was farmland, but there's definite shape. And of course the other feature when we're now coming up to, and again that features on the old tithe maps, that's called Butts Meadow.
Okay.
And the butts referring to that sort of like dug leg shape of trees.
Oh yeah.
In the
I've
middle
seen that
there.
on the map. Yeah, I've seen that on the maps. Yeah.
And that's high banked one side and then that slopes away to the other side. And that's sort of like L-shaped feature. Now that shows up on the tithe map exactly the same shape on the.
Right.
So from the 1840s that was the same shape and not altered much. But that appears to date from the English Civil War, the 1600s,
Wow.
the Cromwell and the Roundheads and all the rest of it. when a lot of the local people had to train to shoot their muskets and things, and they were brought to like butts to practice shooting. Whether there was an earlier version where they had to practice longbows, I don't know. It'd be lovely to find out. But this is definitely thought to be from the sort of like English Civil War, the 1600s period, and that's why that's called the butts, or butts field. And like I say, I have been down to investigate it, and that is and again that's sort of lost a little bit of its shape, but that's high one side, this side is sort of a steeper bank, and then that gradually slopes away further down the other side. So that's all down there, you see.
Yeah, it looks like that's going to be spared on the planning.
When I was doing these cross-country runs, obviously that was open farmland and a lovely view across the valley to the Boyton Hall area, other side of the valley, fantastic views. And of course once we get to the Stow Lodge area, that was the same from there. But even going down the hill, back down towards the recreation ground corner, where Thorns Drive and everything is now, was still open farmland. Because that shows, look, and you just see the Gainsborough Roadhouses on the left hand side where the high school is, and then just an open vista to the right with just sort of fields. So that's like I say, that'd be early 60s when I did these runs. So even in that sort of short time, there's been a huge amount of change.
Yeah. Thanks for watching today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up on YouTube, click the red subscribe button and the bell icon, and you'll get notifications of a new video. And I'll see you in the next video.